This is our second segment of our MOHEC podcast series exploring parents' experiences raising transgender or gender nonconforming youth. In this segment, we hear from Laurie and Ken, who are married and the parents of 3 children, one of whom is a transgender young man. In talking with them, it is clear that parenting a transgender child can be scary, but it doesn't always stay that way. In relating their experiences, Laurie explains why hormone therapy or the use of blockers is so important to young children and their families. And Ken gives insights on parenting a transgender child and interfacing with the healthcare system from a father's perspective. There may be terms in this segment or in others that are unfamiliar to you. Ken refers to the term cisgender, which means people who are not transgender. And this term and others are explained in more detail online at mohec.org. First, let's hear from Laurie.
My name is Laurie. I have a 23-year-old son, a 21-year-old son, and a 17-year-old son who is transgender, born female, with typical anatomy and hormones, who slowly came out to us telling us he was not a girl but a boy at about 2.5 and continued on that path. And around 13, we found a doctor to put him on blockers to stop him from going through puberty and started testosterone at 15.5, and he's doing quite well. I think he would describe it as someone who has the body of a girl but the brain of a boy. At first, we didn't take it seriously because he was so young, but as time went by and it didn't lessen, we knew we were in for something. There were no resources at the time. Our pediatrician didn't know anything. And we were confused and a little scared for the future and tried to ignore it, discourage it, encourage the tomboyness that was appropriate in our society until we couldn't anymore. And looking back, we realized how scared he was of growing up. Terrified is the word he uses, and going through female puberty. Just terrified. He was a terrible sleeper. Our other 2 boys were great sleepers. And I know now he couldn't fall asleep because he was worrying every night about it. Until he was about 12 and we learned of blockers and explained them to him. He was thrilled. In fact, he's written his college essay about his journey, and he says that day changed his life. And even though he's only 17 and hasn't lived a long life, I do believe that's a life-changing event. And the blockers were fabulous. He didn't have to go through female puberty. He'll never need chest surgery. He's on testosterone now, has been for several years. He gives himself injections every other week. No issues. Presents totally as male. No one suspects if they don't know. Low voice, the whole thing.
Can you comment a little bit about time and puberty and why it's important?
We went to a conference when our son was 13 in Philadelphia where there were trans people of all ages. And so many come out later in life, way after they've gone through puberty. So the typical thing you see is a very tall woman with large hands and feet. Structure of their face looks male, but yet long hair and a dress. And they look unusual. You notice them. And the men are often small, and they kind of don't really look male either. Small features, small hands, the whole thing. So if you can get these children before they go through puberty, you avoid them getting the characteristics of the gender that they don't believe they are. So male to female will not get really, really tall, 6 feet or over, and not have facial hair that you have to then spend thousands of dollars to remove down the line. There's so many characteristics that are so much easier to deal with if you can stop that puberty. It makes a world of difference. Plus, especially for a female to male, going through female puberty, periods, breast growth is devastating for these kids. Huge suicide rate. It's not who they believe they are, and there's such signs and behaviors that they deal with as males that they are just totally at odds with. Our transition was very gradual, unlike many people who will one day decide, or this next school year we're going to go as this. It was very gradual, and in fact he still goes by his birth name at school, but totally looks male, and he's gone to school with these children since grade school. Some know the story that he's told to them himself, some guess, some maybe don't know. But the school we've always been very open with. We changed pronouns in maybe 8th grade and legally changed his name in 9th grade. So it's been very gradual. My family has known forever and been fine. Church has been extremely accepting. And we've really had a pretty easy path. School has not been difficult, almost no bullying at all. He is in a public school and doing extremely well. We're very proud of him. He's applying to universities right now, and we're hoping he's going to get a full ride somewhere. So we're very excited.
What does it mean to be a parent of a transgender child?
It's a roller coaster. It's scary. It's so different than the other two. The fears are not the same at all. At first, it's a loss. Many, many people describe it as if their child has died. And my husband says it's as if your child has died but is right there next to you still. So it's really more the death of the dreams. This was his only daughter. He thought he would walk her down the aisle someday. And he's sad about that. And for me, it was all the things I thought a mother-daughter would do together and never really got to do because he never really acted like a typical girl. So that's the initial big thing is the mourning, the fear, the isolation if you don't know anyone else or if you cannot find healthcare professionals that are knowledgeable. So many are not. That's a scary place to be as a parent. You figure something's wrong with my child, I'll go to a medical professional and they'll have the answers. And they don't. It's scary. I've learned that we're the teachers. And I don't look at medical personnel in the same way I used to. I think a lot of people look at them as God. Their decision or their answer is it, and you don't question that. And I don't believe that at all anymore. I feel like I have found a few professionals throughout the country that I rely on, and I do my best to share their information with the people that directly treat my child. And fortunately, that has worked well, the communication between the professionals. But it is a teaching. The doctor that we saw for blockers and that we see now for testosterone, we were her second patient. So she didn't know a lot. We were lucky, I think that's probably the right word, lucky that we found her and that she agreed to treat our child and do it timely so that we didn't have to go through puberty and did it well. I understand that med school is chock full of many different components, and this is one of something they should know, and it's difficult to fit this in with everything else they need to learn. But I think especially for pediatricians, it's important to know this exists. And kids as young as 2 will exhibit signs and they will verbalize this. And the parent will likely come to the pediatrician and they need to understand this and have some resources for those parents. It's really important. And I don't know how to best educate these pediatricians, but I think that's a really great place to start because they're kind of the clearinghouse for these kids and their parents. And even if it's a book or another doctor, something.
If there was one experience or one thing that you wanted to leave listeners with, what would that be?
It gets better. I think for so many of us, when they are young and it's new and we are uneducated ourselves, we are terrified of what the future holds. And many of us will let our minds wander to the scariest places, things that could potentially happen to our children, things that have happened to other transgender children. And that is a very scary place to be, worrying whether your child will grow up and find someone as a partner. And that's something they worry about. But I can honestly say now that at almost 18 years old, I don't worry about those things. I know he's going to find a fabulous wife. In fact, I told him his wife will be the best of his brother's wives. He will find a fabulous person. He will have a great life. He's a happy, healthy person who has a lot of zest for life, and I think he's going to be fine. And I want people to understand it does get better. It absolutely does.
My name is Ken. I have 3 boys. The youngest is a transgender male. Well, when he first told me when I was changing his diaper, when he was about 2.5. And he said, "Daddy, why did God make me wrong?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I'm supposed to be a boy." And of course I argued with him. And even that back then, he argued quite a while about it. But when did I accept it? Probably when he was about 14. I would say was when I finally really totally accepted it. During that period of time, I think, as a parent, it's not something that you want to accept, and it's very difficult. And so for a long time, I was, thinking, oh, it's just a long phase, a very long phase. And even when you know it intellectually, you don't want to admit it emotionally. Even though when you know it's the right thing for your child to get them blockers, it's a difficult decision to make. At least for me, I'm trying to make sure that, am I making the right decision for my child? Because while you can turn back, you're afraid that you may be directing the path. And so I wanted to make very sure that that wasn't the case for me. I was thinking that he'll eventually grow out of it, but it never happened. He was consistent for that whole time period. I think that that's one of the things, and part of the reason we have the transparent group is that it's a struggle for parents. They worry about, are they making the right decision? Am I enabling? Did I cause it? None of those things I think are the case now, but those are what everybody feels and everybody thinks about and worries about. And am I making decisions that are right for my child? Because we know the ramifications of those decisions. And I think we fear the ramifications of our decisions way more than we need to. But I think that you always worry about your child. And when you think about the possibility of having your child be the gender that they were not born biologically, that's a very scary, direction to take.
What hopes do you have for your son?
Oh, the hopes that I think every father has for every son. That he'll have a wonderful, happy life. And I think he will. It took me a long time to get to that point where I thought he would. But I'm now certainly there.
What has been your experience kind of navigating the healthcare system with your son?
I don't think that we've had a lot of problems with the healthcare system. I think we've been fortunate. We had a wonderful pediatrician when the kids were young. Not that he was very helpful with any knowledge about the issues of transgender children, but he was more than willing to accommodate us and try to work with us. But he didn't have any answers for us either. And so that was a struggle because we really didn't know where to go to find out answers. We didn't even really, you're not sure whether you should even be asking the questions. You don't want to be asking the questions. I don't know that he could have been more, well, at the time I don't think he could have been more helpful. But we need to find a way to educate doctors about the issues of transgender children and to have a way that enables, especially pediatricians, I think, to talk to parents, to engage in the conversation. I don't know how that could be affected, but because I can see how difficult that would be for a doctor to try and engage somebody in that conversation who's not ready to hear it. But I think that it's critical that we educate the doctors and at least give them the understanding of what these kids are going through and what tools they have at their disposal to actually help these kids.
Had a doctor brought the conversation up with you, say when your son was 8, do you think you would have been open to that conversation?
At 8, yes, I probably would have been. Earlier than that, I don't know. I would have said, no, I think he's just a tomboy, probably. At the point that we started on blockers, that was a big decision point for me to say that we're going to get blockers. We're going to have some extra time. And I knew at that point, intellectually, this was the right thing to do, to allow him to become the man that he needed to be. And just took a little time to let it settle in. I certainly made some mistakes in parenting my son. I think I tried to encourage him to, well, I guess I should say I tried to encourage him to be a girl. Honestly. And to think at the time, trying to encourage him to understand that he could be a beautiful person, a strong, great person as a woman, and not have to be as a man. Thinking that that was what was the problem. And, it was a mistake on my part, not understanding that, his mind is a man's mind. And you can't just say, oh, you could be a wonderful, strong human being as a woman. Doesn't help. He was always, expressed himself as a boy. So even as, very young, was mistaken as a boy all along. And was always very happy when he was mistaken for a boy. And when someone used male pronouns, he loved it. And so I think coming out over this whole period of time, everybody just knew. And so it wasn't that hard and that much of a surprise for our families, either one of our families. My family's, I was a little bit more worried about because they're pretty conservative. That was a concern, but I needn't have been concerned about it. They were wonderful. You have to follow your child's lead and listen to your child and then think about what is most important to my child. And I think that, what I ultimately did was say, if I project forward 20 years from now, will my child be looking back at me and saying, Dad, thank you for letting me be the person I need to be? Or will he be saying, why didn't you let me become the person I need to be? I knew the answer to that. I just didn't want to accept it. There are differences in people, and it's something that I've learned and my son has taught me. There are broad differences in people, and we need to be accepting those differences and not forcing people into molds that don't affect society in an adverse way.
Through your whole journey and your experience, what would you say has been the biggest challenge?
I guess accepting this emotionally was my biggest challenge. You do have all these expectations for your child, and giving those things up are very difficult. For us, we did see mental health professionals early on, but our child really didn't want to go and spend time with talking to psychologists or psychiatrists, and made a strong argument for there not being a need for that. So we didn't force him to go. And I think that that's been good for him in his situation. Other kids, I think, need it a lot more and need that support more. I once asked my son if there was a pill that you could take that would make you a happy girl, would you do it? And he said no, almost immediately. And then a few weeks later, out of the blue, he brought up, Dad, when you said, was there a pill that I could take that would make me be happy as a girl? And I said, no. He said, I know that if I took that pill, I'd be happy as a girl, but I still really don't want to do it. And it's because it's who you are. It's who he is. He doesn't want to change who he is mentally on the inside, even though he knows that intellectually he would be perfectly happy if that pill exists. The fact of the matter is, those pills don't exist. And the best that we can do now is try to make these kids fit in the best they can, have the best self-image that they can have, given the brains that they have.